What's up everybody, this is BR here, and today I want to talk about a very special word that I like to use a lot, frustration. If you have watched many of my videos, then you've probably noticed that I use frustration a lot whenever I talk about something that really sucks about a game. Or even when I'm talking positively about it, I'm not saying that it's fun, instead I'm saying that it's not frustrating. Now the reason why I like bringing up frustration so much is because it's something that people don't usually think about when they're talking about game design or the experience of playing a game. Most would actually think that the most important thing about a game is how fun it is, or how adding more fun is just gonna somehow solve all the game's problems. Either that or make it extremely successful. Fun and enjoyability can come from many multiple things that people can add into their games, like atmosphere, storytelling, character design, character development, sound design, how complex the AI is. And how can we forget about gameplay design, with how abilities are managed and how they make you feel powerful, how gunplay is coordinated so that way it always feels fun and exciting, how cars in a racer can feel just so nice to maneuver and control that makes it feel so much more fun when you're racing down a track. But then you never really notice anybody commenting about how not frustrating a game can be. And that's usually because, well, if a game's not frustrating, you're not really going to complain about it. You're not going to go to a restaurant and talk about how not terrible the food is, or how not clean the place is, of course. People are just going to stare at you like some sort of weirdo. But unlike a restaurant, frustration in games is a very important thing to always keep in mind. You want somebody to continue playing your game for long periods of time because A, that tells you that your game is very good, and B, you have a greater chance of being an impact in somebody's life, long enough for it to actually be something that somebody might recommend. I mean, you're not really going to talk about a game that you just dropped after 5 minutes. And this is extremely important in multiplayer games where retention is important because the longer somebody plays, the higher chances that they are going to actually pay for some microtransactions. It becomes easier to justify a microtransaction purchase because, well, it's a game that you like and you're dedicated to it. If a multiplayer game becomes frustrating and you no longer play it, well, guess what? A, you're not going to buy a microtransaction for a game you don't like, and B, you won't have access to that microtransaction store in-game. So it's in a company's best interest to keep enjoyment's level high in order to keep retention. And this is why companies tell their developers to try to make a game as fun as possible. Though some companies use a checkbox method in order to make a fun game, others just let their developers do what they know best, which is create an enjoyable game. And this is one of the reasons why we have so many choices of great multiplayer games available. Or even games in general because, well, if a game's not fun, why bother? But one thing that never seems to come up in the majority of why a game is fun is frustration levels. And that's kind of weird to me because a majority of the videos that I see online talking about multiplayer games are usually talking about how frustrating a game can be. I mean, if you recall to what I said, if a game's not frustrating, no one's going to talk about the problems. And people are talking about a lot of problems in games. Hell, including me, that's what one of my most popular videos is about. But at the end of the day, a lot of these games are fun, they're just frequently frustrating, and I don't think that's a good thing. Rather than just focusing on what makes a game fun, we should really focus on what makes a game frustrating, and try to minimize that as much as possible. And you would think that this kind of idea would only come out recently because of the dominance of multiplayer games where frustration is high, but actually, in theory, this has been in development ever since, well, the early 2000s, ever since the development cycle of Team Fortress 2. You see, Team Fortress 2 has a developer commentary, something that I think every game should have, but they don't. And in that developer commentary, it talks a lot about the design decisions with Team Fortress 2. And for a development cycle of 8 years, they have fine-tuned everything in TF2 to be as non-frustrating as possible. You have things that talk about readability having to do with the player models and how to quickly distinguish different characters because getting caught off guard by something that you couldn't tell is really frustrating. Or class design, such as with Heavy being a lot more accessible that only requires aiming and positioning that can be easily avoidable by Heavy speed, making the fights feel fair. Or having the player's screen be as clean as possible, avoiding excessive particle effects to allow the player to see clearly even on a 24-player server. I mean, I can only imagine how a 24-player Overwatch match would look like. And in fact, I think that Overwatch is a good example for the opposite take of this theory, with readability being difficult at a first glance because a lot of the player models have the same silhouettes, only really distinguishable when in motion or when looking at the scoreboard, something that TF2 has never needed. When it comes to gunplay, Overwatch has a lot of characters that just feel extremely cheap, and this is also something that's apparent in Overwatch 2 that they tried to fix. So while heroes are fun to use, fighting against them can be a damn chore. And finally, Overwatch just doesn't take into consideration the cleanliness of a screen. There are really no hold bars for particle effects, and when things get really hectic, things can become extremely unreadable. Of course, for a player who's gotten used to all these particle effects, it's not as hard, but for somebody new, the excess of particle effects can become extremely confusing and overall frustrating. And I think the most frustrating part of Overwatch has to be its main draw, which is teamwork. Because of how much you have to rely on a team, Overwatch can become frustrating when somebody doesn't want to be a team player or somebody's bossing you around to be one. And I think this is something that every Overwatch player can relate a little. And you know what's really surprising? The TF2 commentary actually has a comment on this, talking about how player frustration is mitigated because of the illusion of a team, when in reality people are just kind of doing their own thing. But that illusion alone makes for great team synergy apparently. But don't get me wrong, I've had fun with Overwatch, having fun with team synergy and requiring a little bit more communication than anything else. I mean, hell, if I didn't want anything that was more team oriented, I would have never tried Sixes or Highlander, two competitive formats that require team communication and team synergy. But what I really want you to take in consideration is to look at games and notice which parts of the games are the most frustrating in game design, not matchmaking. Matchmaking is just something completely different that isn't controlled by the game designers. And I also want you to think about if that frustrating part of the game were to be removed, would the game be better overall? Would you enjoy it a lot more? Would it not ruin your day? But please, tell me your opinion down in the comment section down below. Have I convinced you to look at games in a different light, or do you think that fun is really just what matters at the end of the day? Is it another issue? If you found this video interesting, like it if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please subscribe, and I'll talk to you later.